Okay, yeah, on a computer, you have your motherboard in your computer. The main board of the computer input output system is called a motherboard. Well, I just want to remind you that if Germany had won World War II, then they certainly would be called fatherboards, but they're called motherboards, and that's my opinion. Because I'm going to tell you that if a computer has a slave drive and a master drive, if the master drive that is master is connected to a fatherboard, does it mean anything that it's not a motherboard? And if a motherboard is the main power source where everything is connected to, all peripherals connect to the motherboard in a computer, how come it's not called a fatherboard? And further, how come it's not called a fatherboard with a note underneath it that says this is no motherboard and never could be because motherboards are impossible? Well, certainly, maybe if Germany had won World War II, then it would be called a fatherboard, and underneath it there'd be a big note saying, "Pay attention," or warning. Uh, this is a fatherboard, and it is not a motherboard because motherboards don't exist and never could. It's impossible. Like, why would they need to make a note that motherboards couldn't exist and why they call it a fatherboard? Well, because they want to make it known the powers that exist and what they are and what they're not. And a motherboard in our computers today are ultimately the most important part of what makes a computer. The motherboard is the computer itself, in that all the peripherals connect to the motherboard, which make the computer itself. It is the motherboard. And ultimately, if a computer functions as a master drive, driving a slave drive, a secondary slave drive, it's connected to the input output on the motherboard. So does a master connect to the mother board or the father board? Well, does it matter that motherboard is not a fatherboard? And should there be a warning on motherboards and computers that say that this is a motherboard and it could never be a fatherboard because fatherboards don't exist and why the motherboard's the motherboard? There is no fatherboard because it's either motherboard or fatherboard. And if it's motherboard, it's not fatherboard. So there'd be a big warning there. Yeah, like it was like warning, you must read this. Yeah, because everyone has to know. If it's a motherboard, it's not a fatherboard, is it? Well, if it is the slave happy that the master is not mad? And if it's not, is the master mad that the slave's not happy and makes the slave happy so the master can be happy? So who's doing what to whom? And who knows what and who doesn't know anything? And what's what? The motherboard is the main most important part that everything connects to the motherboard. And there's lots of everythings that connect. They all connect to the motherboard. And the master drive connects directly to the motherboard. And the actual slave drive connects only to the master. Well, understand that in the newer motherboards, there becomes secondary input outputs so that the cables can be attached to have two different drives, and they're no longer differentiating whether it's a master or slave, because if you have a primary and a secondary connection, then you could have two masters and they could both be connected to the motherboard. But note, it's not the fatherboard. And if it is the fatherboard, is it the same thing as the motherboard? And does it really matter that it's a father or mother? Well, I'd say Germany would insist it's a fatherboard and not a motherboard, or else it couldn't be the fatherboard. And maybe we have motherboards because America and Russia won the war, and this is our motherland, not our fatherland. And ultimately, if this is our motherland, well, I want y'all to know that if this is our motherland, it better be our motherland, because if it's our fatherland, but we're calling it our motherland, well, then we're the one who are deceiving ourselves. And I wouldn't think that Germany would deceive itself, because they would say this is a fatherland, not a motherland. There's no motherland, there's a fatherland. So ultimately, you'd say, yeah, but you're wrong. Well, no, we're not. We're telling you that it's not mother, it's father. Okay, great. So what are we doing? Well, we may be telling everybody that it's mother and not saying anything about father. But what we're going wrong is, if it is mother, we're not wrong. But what if it's father, but we're calling it mother? Well, then something's wrong, and who knows? Maybe nobody knows something's wrong with something, and I don't understand. Well, does it matter that it's called a motherboard and it should be called a fatherboard, with a note saying that you have to understand that only one of them is going to be in charge? that in fact, to have a secondary port, so you can put two master drives they still connect to the mother or father board. So it won't matter. Everybody's enslaved to the mother or father board. And if the slave is enslaved to the master drive that's enslaved to the mother or father board, there's a pecking order and some form of control that never ends. Which one are you? A father board or a mother board? And if you could be two, would there be any wars and conflicts? And if you can't be two, you're going to be one, well, then which one are you not going to be? And if you can only be one, because there is only one motherboard, well, I'm here to tell you that you're not a father board. If you're a motherboard, are you? Well, if you could be both, is there a conflict? And if you can be both and there is a conflict, well, maybe you should know that you can't be both. And so if you could be in both and not in a conflict, then it is possible to be both. And if it's impossible to have both, this is not a mother-father board or a father-mother board. And we could argue all day, it's father-motherboard, or how come they don't call it father-motherboard or a mother-father board? Because people say we have to put mother first, father second. And then the men will say, no, it's a father-motherboard. No, and the women say, no, it's a mother-father board. Well, ultimately, let's just call it a motherboard and keep everyone ignorant to the idea that no one's even asking themselves why the freaking slave drives connect to the master drive, who's freaking enslaved to the motherboard. And it's probably a father board, not a motherboard. And all the women are mad now.